Hello and welcome to Console Shock, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev, and joining me as always is Stu. How you going, Stu?
Hi Trev, yeah, I'm doing really well.
Looking really good in your call centre setup you've got, I can see on your webcam
everyone's
today.
Making fun of me because I've got a headset on, I'm wearing a white shirt, so they think I'm in a call centre.
Yeah.
So if I do go off for a little minute, it's because I've had a call come in and I've got to deal with it.
Yeah, that's very good of you. It's good. That's the great thing about call centres now. You can do it from home and you can just dip in and out of it.
Exactly. Do a podcast from a call centre. So,
this is a joke, by the way. You don't actually do that, do you? You have a.
I don't work in a call centre.
No.
There's nothing wrong with working in call centres.
I've done it, you know. I did do it when I was in my 20s.
I've done it also, actually.
Yeah. Can't say it was that much fun, but it's that classic kind of early 20s age job, I think, you know, like working in a supermarket, you know.
Exactly, working in a supermarket, working in a bar, working in a call centre,
retail, yeah, all that kind of.
I can't imagine.
All that kind of.
It's a great thing to do, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we also have our new semi-regular guest. And one of the Console Shock OGs, and it is Al, who's joining us again. How's it going, Al?
It's good. Thank you for having me back once again.
No worries. We always try and, we're trying to get you on like semi-regularly. I mean, there's no real rhyme or reason behind it. It's kind of like every 2 or 3 shows, I think, we get you on. You're obviously on a lot of other podcasting things as well, including one that we do together, so we probably want to have a break from podcasting in between those, so we don't want to have you on all the time.
Is that the Star Wars one that you do?
Yeah, it's not Star Wars though. It's another kind of sci-fi based thing. It's Galaxy Quest, isn't that right?
Galaxy Quest, Babylon 5.
Babylon 5, yeah. Babylon Space 9.
Babylon, yeah.
Sequest DSV. Remember Sequest DSV? No.
Escape Gate.
Quantum Leap.
Yeah. Quantum Leap.
Great show.
I was genuinely listening to the soundtrack earlier today because a friend of
Quantum
mine
Leap.
reminded me of it. Yeah. My brother's name is Sam. I'm Al. So I even used to make the joke that I was a hologram that only my brother could see and hear.
So your brother being Sam Beckett, of
Yes.
course, played by who was in the series, played by Count Bakula himself, Scott Bakula.
Did you have a sister called Ziggy?
No. Susie.
That would have been perfect.
But does Susie count enough?
Susie, yeah, that sort of works. Yeah, that sort of works.
Is she a small handheld device held by Al, by you?
Yeah. That flashes a lot.
Yeah.
No.
No, go there, girlfriend.
Oh no,
Yeah.
let's stop
Anyway.
implying that.
Right, guys, we need to talk about the video games. This
Yes.
what this podcast is about. The
That's
video
what people
games.
are here for.
Video games, GHEYMES games. So that's what we're talking about, as always. And yeah, it's actually what we're going to chat about today is something that we've kind of touched upon in little segments of other shows. Recently, we had a whole show about emulation, and this is kind of a factor in what we're doing today. And Stu, we actually talked recently about like PSN delisting games, PS3 store, Vita store shutting down, and that's causing digital-only games to disappear. So what we're going to focus on today is preservation. So that could be things like, digital stores closing down, but it could also mean physical copies of things, dying. Obviously, things like mask ROMs that are on cartridges are pretty reliable, but there's CDs. I'm in a Sega Saturn Facebook group for collectors, and there's kind of an ongoing joke, although has a sort of a semblance of reality, of Sega Saturn games suffering from disc rot. Meaning that they're just going to become unplayable, at some point. So you have a lovely box with a disc, but that's all it's going to be is a lovely box with a disc. And what kind of procedures the big guys, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, actually doing to try and keep old games running and working and sort of making things forward compatible. So I'll sort of start with you, Al. What are your thoughts, sort of initial sort of hot take on sort of the video game preservation, like where it is at the moment? Where do you think it should be? Those sort of things.
Wow, big question, really. There's
It's a
lot
bit
to
big.
unpack there. Yeah, because I think there's definitely a difference between the kind of people who are involved in a lot of this kind of stuff, especially when it comes to collecting and preservation. There's people who see game collecting as an investment,
Yeah, yeah,
those who see it as a hobby.
yeah,
And I think that's where a lot of things are kind of divided. So, as a hobby thing, I think it's fantastic. You know, the fact that there are people who are trying to collect things in the same way that people collect comic books.
yeah, yeah.
But especially in terms of preservation, when you're saying like disc rot is a thing there, you've got a lot of very passionate people who a lot of times completely off their own back, no financial incentive, are there just for the love and joy of the games, just wanting to keep them alive.
Yes, yes.
Even people just donating or loaning to computer museums. So
Yeah.
others can still see some excellent old hardware and software, games that people otherwise may never have had the chance to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all really good points. I mean, from a collecting sort of point of view, I mean, Stu, you mean you're not? We know you sort of collect. I mean, where are you with your collection? You are the sort of person that you're trying to get complete sets of things, or are you just getting?
I mean, you know, my opinion on complete sets is ridiculous. You're just buying games that weren't very good, that you don't want to play, and it doesn't make any sense.
It's over the top in my opinion.
It's over the top,
Yeah.
you know, and and I'm all for collecting collections of games that you like, and if you're a big fan of certain things, certain genres or publishers or game developers and things like that, going for all of their games, I think that's a little bit more interesting. But just getting complete sets for the sake of it is I think it's a little bit of waste of time, really. But from my point of view is I think where it comes to sort of game preservation is for a lot of the sort of the old NES games, the Super Nintendo games. It's great to be able to sort of collect them and have them sort of on your shelf, but it's just becoming so sort of price prohibitive.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
the right word. At the moment to achieve that, and we're all guilty of watching YouTube videos, and people will talk about, oh no, this is a brilliant game on Earthbound on the Super Nintendo, or
the RPGs that we're constantly hit over the head with
Panzer
all the
Dragoon
YouTubers.
Saga, and they're games that if you want to play, you've got to drop £500, if not more, maybe a little bit less, to be able to play these games. And
some of them aren't even rare. Some of them aren't even rare. I mean, you'll see like Super Mario Brothers, the original NES Black Box edition. Going for £100 for a complete copy. I mean, there's literally millions of those, tens of millions. Yeah,
exactly. And the prices, if the market, if that's what they demand, that's what it should be sold for. That's what the market says. If someone puts up for £100 and it constantly sells for that by right, that's what it should go for.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to say is that it's just very difficult to actually, if you want to preserve these games for yourself, is actually going down sort of the physical routes. And maybe later generations like 360, PS3, it's a lot easier, a lot cheaper to go out there and buy the games that you want. And I think, I don't know how people in 20 years' time, if they want to, preserve Xbox One games or PS5 games, and because the actual physical disc is nothing more than an instruction to say, oh, go and download something.
Yeah,
I think, and that's almost sort of quite sad, because if those servers are turned off, which hopefully they never will be, but someone's saying the server will never be turned off, and if you've got a disc and if you put that into your machine and okay, the server's turned off, right, you can't download it. And I remember a game on the Xbox 360 called Naruto Broken Bond. It's not a particularly good game. I wouldn't recommend anyone go and get it. For one, it's not great, but for another reason, there was some sort of publisher issue. So there's the patch that is meant to be downloaded with it. It doesn't download anymore.
Right.
So the game's actually unplayable.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's ones that are
So-
actually intentionally will become unusable. Like, I
Mm.
mean, it's not like this for all the versions of this game, but the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of Call of Duty Black Ops 3, which is multiplayer only. So when that server's gone, I don't even think you can do local multiplayer in a split screen thing with it. So when that server gets turned off, which it might already have already been done, that game is just a coaster,
Yeah.
So yeah. Al, what do you think about that?
Well, the idea of a day one patch is definitely something that's something that actually put me off quite a few years ago, when that started to become the norm, that you get a game and not only does it take a while, that you had to actually install it rather than it just playing straight off a cartridge or disk. You have to install it, and then it also has to download a day one patch. And
it's absolutely the norm now. It's 100% the norm. Yeah.
And if the initial release is completely unplayable and it relies on that day one patch, then you are screwed right out of the gate.
I mean, that's a pain as well. I mean, you mentioned like just the day one patch, but I've had moments when just trying to play like FIFA, I'll maybe I haven't played it for a month because I've been doing other things, playing other games, and I'll jump back in, and I'll try and launch the game. It will say, no, you need to apply an update to play this. I mean, okay, most of the time you can dismiss it, but it's often like 3 or 4 gig. So I've got to wait an hour, or half an hour maybe if my connection's been good, to download that just so I can play a game. And a lot of the time I just go and play something else, or I'm just do something completely different. And again, that's nothing that would have been on the disc. This is things that have come out subsequently, So yeah,
I don't, to sort of disagree with you there, Trev. I don't mind day one patches. They're sort of part and parcel of the game. And if you and if they mean that the game can be the disc can be printed in November and then it comes out in December, and they've got another month of developing and fixing any bugs, I think that's potentially a good thing. And then games being sort of constantly updating and evolved, and that's also, I think it's become quite a good thing with games these days. And great example is Sea of Thieves, and the day one game is completely different from the game that you're playing sort of 2-3 years later because of all the updates that they're doing. But then the issue is, in 10 years time, can you still go on there and have a great Sea of Thieves experience? Can you still will all the patches download? And I don't know the answer to that. Touch wood, hopefully they will be, but
there's an argument as well. I mean, you've got kind of brings up a couple of poins that on its own. I mean, you could argue, well, they should wait till the game's finished and then release the full game at that point. And also, it's I think we've been brought up on there's quite a few, multiple decades of just being able to buy something, and that's the final version on the disc. And perhaps even when we got into the 360 and PS3 era, maybe there'll be a little patch. I mean, it was getting quite prevalent then, to be honest. So I'm not going to let that off lightly. That gen, like Gran Turismo for the PS3. I mean, Christ, that was like, you'd have to sort of download. I mean, a lot of those PS3 games, someone wouldn't even start until you installed the game. I mean, later on, you had to install certain 360 games, but that was like right at the end, like the last couple of years of the game. And maybe if you bought like Elder Scrolls Oblivion Shivering Isles, I mean, that's part of it. That needs to be installed into the base game. So there's an element of that there as well. But yeah, I think for the most part, we would buy the game and it would just be the final version and it would just play, So, that goes back to the very first video games. So to suddenly be hit with, when we got to the PS4, Xbox One era, with all these day one patches, it's quite jarring. I mean, I guess kids, who the Xbox One and the PS4 was their first console. they won't be bothered about it. They'll just be like, oh, it's just how it is, We'll be like, oh, in our day, you just put the cartridge in and it worked, and we'll just be these old weirdos talking about how games used to be. But yeah, it's definitely a big frustration, and there's an element. I think I touched upon this on one of the previous shows recently as well, with the whole day one patch thing. I remember seeing like a Twitter debate about how usable is that disc that you've bought before it has the day one patch. Yeah. And a lot of people were saying, oh, it's going to be useless, you won't be able to play the game. And then actually John Lineman jumped in and was saying, no, you'll definitely, with any game that has a day one patch, it will definitely, you'll be able to play the whole game through to completion, guaranteed. And I was like, well, it's John Lineman, he's awesome, he probably knows his stuff. But I'm like, really, can you be sure of that though? Like the entire game?
Some of these are to fix game-breaking bugs.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in the title of the problem.
Yeah. At some point in the game, if you played through it, might not be at the start, but 5 hours in, there might be a game-breaking bug that day one patch fixes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. I think it's difficult to say or it may be impossible to say unless you went to every developer and asked them what does this day one patch fix? If that disc will actually be playable all the way through in the future. But I don't think that's going to change. I think there's going to be day one patches. There's no people are a bit, and we get annoyed at them. We sort of have a grumble to ourselves, and that's it. But I don't think there's going to be any turnaround.
A lot of my grumblings are just from growing up with the fact that if I've only got say 20 minutes, half an hour to play a game, I could just pop it in, and within like a minute I'm already playing, and then patches which are forcing to download, and it's like, well, that's my half hour done right there just trying to load the darn thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that could have been an entire level you could have gone through.
That's it. So that's old grumble Al kind of and why retro games often can be quite preferable, especially when you're short on time.
Yeah, and also Al, going back to you, I mean, talking about companies and their efforts to preserve games, we've touched upon sort of Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft already. We'll go back to them later, but you have a lot of experience with like Arcade 1-Up, with their brilliant arcade recreation cabinets. I mean, I think you've got multiple, haven't you?
I do, yes. Yeah, and it works out at something like most of them have between 2 and 12 games. And so I think amongst my collection, I've got about just over 40 games in total.
That's awesome.
Amongst like 5 or 6 cabinets, something like that. And
how do you find the experience? I mean, is it just pretty much as good as it seems to me like they're as good as you'll be able to get with modern hardware, and it's obviously quite impractical to have old school arcade machines unless you're like the Last Gamer and all those guys that collect them. But are they worth the money, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on what you're wanting out of them, and there's certainly a lot that you can do. So the controls that they come with, like being able to have, playing something on a keyboard or joypad is one thing. Being able to actually stand up at a cabinet or sit at one, because you can get stools for them as well, and playing with actual arcade controls completely changes things, because you're playing with controls that are similar to what they actually had. Like I've even got an Atari one that has a spinner for Tempest, and it's got a trackball for a lot of games like Missile Command. So you're playing with more accurate control schemes for what you had. They're even doing driving games, so you've got steering wheels which feel like a proper arcade one. But there are also Sanwa controls, so Sanwa joysticks and buttons that people can still mod in, because when you get them, they're flat packed. They're like IKEA furniture, and you assemble them that way. And so there's a lot of people who will modify them. They'll put in better speakers, better buttons. So there's even a lot of other things that people can do to take them even further still. But in terms of size, they're a lot more compact, which for home use is a lot better. Trying to lug in an absolutely massive original arcade cabinet, they are big, they are heavy. Some of them won't even fit through a regular door. So you have that challenge. Plus the parts are expensive, they're old, so it's a lot more difficult to maintain. Whereas having something like the ones from Arcade 1-Up, you don't particularly have that kind of issue.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point in general about arcade machine preservation, because It's all very well being able to do a console, you know, when you've got a very defined sort of in console architecture and environment, but arcade machines, I mean, light gun games and games with special controllers, and it's really difficult to emulate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The light gun games are something that they're starting to get into. They've done some, it's like, I've forgotten what the name of the hunting one is, like Buckshot Hunter or something like that.
Cabela.
Yeah.
No, and then there's also rumors of them doing like a Time Crisis and things like that. They've already done the Terminator 2 one, but that wasn't really a light gun game. That was a gun on a joystick that kind of gave you the impression that it was that. But I think they're actually using actual light guns for it.
Oh, that's
because
cool.
theirs aren't actually lodged to the control. So that's where they kind of almost made it the kind of game that you thought it was when it wasn't really. So interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, that's always it's been a bane of everyone's life with retro gaming, being able to get like light guns working, because obviously with modern TVs they simply don't. There have been like light gun games on like the sort of 7th gen consoles like the Wii and PS3 mainly, because they've got sort of sensor bar based and camera based tracking sort of, you know, MacGuffins that they can be used with, which can work just as well as a light gun. I mean, I've played like House of the Dead 3 and 4 on PS3, and it actually is really good with the Move controllers. You can just plug them into a gun sort of attachment, and the experience is really good. I mean, it probably is a bit more accurate than an actual light gun was back in the day. The Xbox 3.
Yeah, and as time goes on, even if you're wanting to go with a CRT display, there's hardly anybody producing those anymore. And trying to get hold of a working one, again, it's as the more time goes on, the harder it is to obtain these things or keep them going.
Do you have a CRT at home, Al, for like some of your consoles? Have you gone down that route?
No, I did when I lived in London. I actually had a large widescreen CRT that I was using for my Dreamcast. So I would use that, and I'd have all the Lightning games for that. That was a lot of fun. I also had my Master System, which had the gun that they had. I forgot what the name of it was.
Oh yeah, the light phaser.
That's it. And then the Nintendo Zapper, I had one of those as well for my NES. But yeah, since moving to Canada, I've not really gone the CRT route. Yeah,
they're just too big and bulky. For me, I haven't got enough room in my flat to really have one. I don't begrudge anybody doing it, but I mean, I quite like pixel art on how it comes across on CRT screens. I know some people cannot play it. It has to be on a CRT. It has to be on the CRT.
It's got to be on a CRT, Trev.
Yeah.
But that's it. When it comes down to game preservation, it's about playing it on. You're looking at the original piece of art and how it's meant to be displayed. So if you're preserving it correctly, when someone was programming this in 1992, they weren't thinking, they're going to be playing it on a 52-inch 4K screen that's all stretched out. They're going to be playing it on a 20-inch CRT, and that's how the art should be displayed. And I appreciate there's impracticalities to that, and in reality it's not always possible, and these TVs are not making them anymore. They're going to break and things like that. But I think to try and replicate that CRT experience as much as you can, whether with a Retro Tink or a FrameMeister or an OSSC, to try and get the experience as close to the original. I reckon that's the sort of the best way to go.
Yeah, especially when you've got like Sega with the Mega Drive or Genesis in North America. They were embracing those limitations of like the loss of color resolution and all the artifacts in the video signal. But even in Sonic the Hedgehog, if you play that now, waterfalls just look like vertical lines, whereas they actually look transparent because of the way it was kind of shifting.
Exactly. And there's lots of examples.
The PS1 is a good one. The PS1 has all the dithering on the screen, and that gets blurred out with the CRT. Yeah,
and you get issues also with input lag, which can make games feel not feel right.
Yeah,
And that's where the playing it on the original hardware is how it's meant to be played. And of course on through other machines, like OSSCs and FrameMeisters, they can sort of cut that lag out and sort of
definitely.
And when we look at the arcade sort of situation again, I mean, there have been a lot of games that got home ports. Obviously, we can name whatever ones we want to name, but famous ones. But then, like one company that I always look to, and I'd wish they would release more of their arcade machines, is Sega. I mean, games like, or just one I can think of straight away, Scud Race. Which is like a really brilliant Daytona USA 2. A lot of those Model 3, Model 2, Model 1 games like Wing War. We got, I was going to say Virtua Striker, but we got the first Virtua Striker on the PSN and Xbox Live. But yeah, you get my point. There's a lot of games that they just didn't release on. Scud Race is an annoying one or Super GT as it's called in some countries, because it was used as a technical demo for the Dreamcast. So everyone was like, well, they're obviously going to, release the game for it, but they didn't. It never came out on the Dreamcast in the end. It just stayed as a technical demo, which is really frustrating. But yeah, I mean, these are things that aren't on discs, aren't on cartridges. You're really relying on, well, there's obviously people that have got the data from the ROMs and the arcade machine. But like Stu, you're talking about, the games like from that era probably should be ideally viewed on a CRT to take advantage of the tricks that the programmers put in. I mean, you got a game like Scud Race that was intended to be shown on a 42-inch rear projection screen with a steering wheel and being in a sometimes they would have a deluxe cabinet where you're inside like a Formula One car, like in virtual racing and things like that. I mean, yeah, obviously some of that isn't practically ever going to be replicated, but there's a big frustration with a lot of these companies not really being willing to port a lot of these arcade machines. I wish they would do that more.
Yeah, I mean, what's everyone's opinion? Because quite recently, probably 7-8 years ago, Daytona came out on the Xbox 360 and the PS3, and virtual racing came out a few years ago on the Switch. And I thought there were, brilliant ports and things like that. But again, it's, how critical are we going to be? Is that, well, that's not really the original game. It is, no. but it's been, changed. It's been, more power's been put into it. It's been optimized, and hopefully it feels the same. But is it the original game to, what was made on the arcade all those years ago? And just putting that out there.
And we've got even Sonic Mania coming out in June, and I think that's a perfect example where the entire game was rewritten from scratch. This is a collection of Sonic 1, 2.
It's not called Sonic Mania. It's called something else.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. It's by the same guys who did Sonic Mania.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, yes, Sonic Origins, and so it's the collection of the original games, but they were rewritten from scratch, and that allows them to take advantage of things. Well, first of all, multi-platform support natively, so you get better performance, widescreen support, leaderboards, achievements, any of that kind of stuff. And so you're playing the original games, but you're also not. But in some ways, you could also say, well, it also modernizes them in a way that kind of makes them the best way to play them, perhaps, for some people. But it's always going to be subjective. Some people will be like, no, I don't like that it's in widescreen because that's not how it was designed. Whereas others will be like, I like being able to have that extra real estate.
No, well, exactly. There isn't a right answer to it, is there? It's either going to be, oh well, I'll only play it on the original hardware. It must be played on the Mega Drive. It must be on a 14-inch TV because that's how I played it. It must be with an RF lead. That's how it must be. Or actually, they're coming back and saying, well, actually, we've taken the original code. We've written a real love letter to this game, and we've made it actually a little better by all these brilliant, it's got save features, it's a wider screen, it's got this, it's got that, but it's still got the essence of the game, and that's where I think it can be done well, and hopefully Sonic Origins is going to go, Sonic fans are going to play that and go, actually this feels 100%, this is a real improvement of the original game, and won't make a real. I think the Sonic on the GBA that they did, and everyone's like, oh, don't play that Sonic 1 version for the Game Boy Advance. They've ruined it. They've somehow made it slow, made it screen tearing, and all these things, and actually ruined the game to sort of a certain extent. So that's why I think hopefully the Sonic Origins has done a real sort of love letter to it. And but talking about that, I think I read something maybe on Reddit that because this Sonic Origins have come out, that Sega have now delisted the original Sonic games. I want to say the 360. I want to say like the the PS4,
the Sega Aegis collection.
I think they have, yeah.
Yeah. So for things like on the Switch, so you can't buy those versions anymore. And and I'm thinking, oh well, there might be a reason. Well, people might get a little bit confused when they go to the online store, and they might buy the older one and not the newer one, or is it just to try and get more sales? I'm not quite sure.
It's happened before, isn't it? With when the GTA trilogy came out, on the Switch and the PS5 and PS4 and Xbox, they delisted all the older versions of the original versions of the game that were available on various platforms. And some people were like, oh, no, I don't want to play these new broken versions of the game. I want the old one. But when a company makes a new version of it, they think, no, you're not getting that one now. You need to buy this new one. We've remade it. You don't want to play that one anymore. There's a Dead Space remake coming out. They're going to delist the original Dead Space, which isn't particularly a massively old game and runs fairly well on modern hardware, and has got versions that run on. Well, they take it off the Xbox One backwards compatibility. Because they want you to buy. Will EA insist that you take it off because we're giving you Dead Space remake now? And maybe, I really love the Dead Space games. If I play the remake and think, well, you know what, this isn't as good as the original, I've just got to grin and bear it, and because the company's line will be, well, no, this is better now. This is the better version. We've disavowed the old one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking when you were talking about sort of Dead Space was Resident Evil or Resident Evil 2, for example. Now, Resident Evil 2, obviously that came out on the PlayStation. I think you can still buy it through online stores and things like that, and so play a version of the old one. But then they came out with the remake, and it's Resident Evil 2. There are similar puzzles in there and things, but it is basically a different game. And it's not just a remake of you're not doing all the same things. It's very similar. So part of me is thinking, well, actually, I think this Dead Space remake, and I haven't looked into it, I've got no idea, will actually be a completely different experience in the essence of the original Dead Space. And hopefully it's not just going to be Dead Space on the 360 with 4K textures and 60 frames per second and exactly the same story. I hope it's going to be a similar vein of it. That makes sense.
But it still doesn't. It shouldn't invalidate the original version at the same time. It might be really good in its own merit, the remake, but then people still might want to just, I just want to play the vanilla original version. There's something about that. It was what I grew up with. It was or whatever, and a remake will never replace that. So there needs to be a game like that. You'll be okay because there's plenty of discs around, and it didn't need a day one patch and all of that stuff. But yeah, that's another thing. Remakes and compilations negating, causing companies to disavow the older versions.
It's interesting just how much things have changed since they released Super Mario All Stars for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah,
Mm.
one of the first compilations, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and also just remade it, modernized the graphics so that the original games looked like Super Mario World. And in a way, you still had kind of a choice as to which one you like. And even now playing, a lot of it comes down to the kind of mood I'm in as to which version I want to play. Do I want to play the original graphics? Do I want to play the one that looks a little bit more updated? They do have a different feel, even though they are the same game that play the same way.
Yeah, they did piss some people off actually because they used it kind of has the Super Mario World, Mario's momentum and physics are kind of based on the Super Mario World and not on the original NES game, so they do feel different. I mean, I think Super Mario All Stars is the best way to play those games. Personally, I've got no problem with the momentum. I don't think it's basically I describe it as Mario's not as slippery as he is in the NES game, so. If anything, that's the technical term. If anything, there kind of probably makes it a bit easier because he's got a bit more weight to him than he does in the other games. It's just super nitpicky. But I remember people saying in those days, like, yeah, something about the games feel a bit off compared to the NES versions. It's because they used the Mario World physics for those games. But yeah, that was a great compilation. And then I thought it was ridiculous when they re-released that for the Wii, and it was basically the SNES ROM just dumped on a Wii disc. They didn't even try and try and enhance them or do anything with them, which was kind of silly.
God, it's and
it takes
crazy.
It takes me also, like Al, you mentioned Sonic Origins, and then he said oranges there. Actually, I'm going to call it Sonic Oranges. I don't care.
Oranges, yeah.
That's what Eurogamer always like to call Batman Arkham Origins, Arkham Oranges. So I'm going to take their lead with that.
Got to go fast, got to go fruity.
Yeah, so fast it's fruity, like an orange. Yeah, I remember like the Saturn compilation. I mean, the Sonic games have been compilated to all get out, But the Saturn one was really good because they aren't ports either. They actually rebuilt those games for the Saturn. Because the Saturn wasn't powerful enough to emulate the Mega Drive with a huge amount of accuracy. So maybe even at all. So they actually rebuilt the games, and there are complaints about those as well. People say the music stops in weird places. The sound effects aren't as high fidelity as the versions on the Mega Drive. I think the music is actually just like Redbook audio that's being just played. It's not like the sound chip isn't generating it.
They just plugged into like the headphone out and just recorded the audio, if I recall.
Yeah, quite literally, which makes perfect sense. There's no need. It's better. It's far less time consuming than having someone reprogram the Saturn sound chip to sound like the Mega Drive, which it might not be able to do. They might not be able to get the precise sounds. So yeah, it was probably a good call. But yeah, they rebuilt those games completely for that compilation. And since then, we've had it. I mean, I remember Sonic Mega Collection on the GameCube and Sonic Gems Collection, which had like Sonic CD and Sonic R. And then, I mean, we really have some major troubles when we're sort of talking about the Saturn era and later. It seems to be like relatively easy to emulate, that sort of third, fourth gen 8 and 16-bit games, and that's why they're far more prevalent in their availability. When we get to like Saturn, PlayStation, and then PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and later, the preservation and the ability to play these games on newer hardware really starts to fall off, doesn't it? Because those consoles are more complicated and it needs more horsepower to emulate them. I mean, you can emulate a PS3 pretty well now on a PC, which is something that I've done to play around with. Although I'd still rather would play on an actual PS3. But what do you think they need to do more in terms of like? I mean, Al, do you think they're doing enough at the moment? I think Sony and Microsoft doing enough to let you play those old sort of 5th, 6th, 7th gen games? Should they be doing more?
It's hard to say because I also don't know fully a lot of the licensing issues that are probably there. I'm sure that there's probably a lot more that they'd want to do that legally they have difficulties with. I think that with the Sonic, again, this is just from what I've heard. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think that with the Sonic 3 and Knuckles release in Sonic Origins, they're just going to be going with the Sonic and Knuckles version of the soundtrack. And again, that's because there was a whole issue with Michael Jackson's music being used on the original Sonic 3.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's always going to be something that kind of gets in the way, even when all the best intentions and duty of care and stuff is there. But yeah, it's
Do
also
you play
just
old games? Do you play old games on sort of the modern consoles? Do you stick the old discs in and play them? I mean, there's an argument where no one uses backwards compatibility. Is that something you actually use yourself, Al?
I don't really have backwards compatibility on anything that I've got. So I'm using my Nintendo Switch to play a lot of the old games using the Switch Online thing. I've got an old Mac that I boot camp into Windows. It's the last one that supports Windows XP. It's a 2009 model. And I use that for playing old Windows XP games. So those aren't emulated. I'm still running those natively on Windows. On actually hardware, it's better than on the PC I had at the time when I bought those games brand new. So a lot of kind of stuff like that. But yeah, and I
personally,
think
it would be great if they did. It'd be great if you could fully back. If the PS5 could run everything from PS1 all the way up to PS5 by you putting the disc in and everything worked. But I just don't think that's possible.
Far too many technical limitations that prevent that. And I think that with you saying like, are they doing enough and things, I think that there's always going to be a point that because this is all very subjective, everybody has their own point of view as to what they prefer. Whether they go with all the genuine stuff or the emulating or backwards compatibility, whatever it is, you're never going to please everyone. There's always going to be somebody out there who something just doesn't live up to expectations. And I think that they just have to sort of just take a shot at what they feel is best and go with that. But when you take away like the old ones, then I think that's where it's even worse. I think to your point earlier, if they're re-releasing stuff, if the older versions are still available, then you've got the choice there. If the older version's taken away and there's no way to get hold of it again, then you're kind of being forced into something that you either love or you hate.
Yeah, replacing it with a new version, it isn't really preserving that game, is it? No. You're just adding a new version that also will need to be preserved in addition to the old one, which should be kept around. At the same time. Stu, what about you in terms of like the whole backwards compatibility thing? Obviously, it's very patchy these days. Do you use it? Would you like it?
I do with my Xbox. I'll play lots of 360 games. Is probably the biggest, the sort of the biggest way that I'll use a backwards compatible sort of software. And I've got PlayStation 2, and I'll play my PlayStation 1 games on that. But for me, I think the biggest thing is, I mean, preservation. The way I sort of see it is actually keeping the physical media, and that's the best way of, if you've got sort of memories from your childhood or games that you want to go back. I think at the moment is get the original hardware, get the software, and actually sort of preserve it that way. And potentially that could be, through an EverDrive, or that type of sort of system. So you're actually playing the file, but on the original hardware. I think that's another great way of preserving these games. Because I mean, my original point was, well, it's so expensive to get these games, and now what I'm finding is that PlayStation 2 games, ones, I remember that one. It used to be £1 game, and it's 15 quid. They 15, 16 quid, 20 quid, or and you think, hold on, that used to be £1, like not a few years ago. That's crazy, that you're paying all this money for it now. So I think through storing the ROMs, playing them on the original hardware, or buying, if you're a real fan of a certain game, go out and buy it on disc, or buy the cartridge and get it in a good condition. That's super important, and and I think you'll enjoy that.
Yeah. I think go on now. Sorry,
I was just going to say that I think that that you're right, that it's becoming prohibitively expensive. And a lot of that is just down to the fact that it's an unregulated market that has kind of been manipulated in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of stuff where prices are being bumped up artificially. And I mean, there's talk of, is it going to be a bubble that will burst? Quite possibly. As for when that is, who knows? But again, this kind of goes back to what we were saying before about there's some people who see game collecting as an investment and others as a hobby. And the moment you're looking at people who are doing it as an investment, where they're not buying the games to collect and keep, they're just looking at just flipping it around and making a profit. They're the ones who are driving these prices up. So the games that are being listed, it trickles down, because even when you look on eBay, you see the prices of some games and you're like, really? For a game that's not even rare, it's how many hundreds of pounds or dollars? A lot of it's because they're seeing what the expensive ones that are going for hundreds of thousands are going for, and going, oh, well, I can justify more for this, and then it just outprices everybody out of it being able to collect and keep these things themselves. I sold my retro game collection because I couldn't, and I've mentioned this before, how I couldn't really deal with the playing cross-compatible over different regions, from UK in Canada. And even though I sold my whole collection, I say whole, but I saved some of them, which is kind of to Stuart's point, keeping some stuff, because I know that they're ones that I'll never be able to afford to get in the future. I have, for example, on the original Nintendo, I've got Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, and I kind of keep that one because it's Hero Turtles, not Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, it's unique.
For Canadians, they'd be like, what the hell is this? It's like, well, this is part of British history for me to have that one. And I've got Back to the Future 2 boxed for the Sega Master System because I'm a huge Back to the Future fan. So I have kept a couple of little ones just for my own personal collection and, to preserve for myself.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, but I mean, going forward, I could never rebuy them because they would just be astronomical with the way that things are going.
I don't think going forward we'll see another console like perhaps the PS3. I think is the best example of a console that can play a hell of a lot of, can span multiple generations. I watched a video where Mystic is a good PlayStation YouTuber. He says just get a backwards compatible PS3, get a PS5. You can play nearly every PlayStation game that's ever come out. Which is a really good point. You can cover yourself with just those two consoles. But with the PS3, you had, with the fat models that had the full PS2 backwards compatibility, having the emotion engine and the graphic synthesizer processors inside it from the PS2. You could do PS1, PS2, PS3, but not in the sense of the few games that are on the store, on the PSN store, that are old games. It was literally, you put the disc in, it will just play. It's not 100%. There's very few that don't work, but it's astonishingly high how compatible it is. But that's obviously that's a unique solution that I don't think will ever happen again. Sony at the moment are just happy to let you be able to use the last gen games, and that's it. I'm hoping maybe there'll be more of an effort to make things more forwards compatible. But I don't know. I mean, I didn't think it was an issue for a company just to make game discs work from the previous console, because they're not really. I think what's changed is they have to create a unique emulation profile or an emulation layer on a per game basis, whereas before they just tried to have a software or a hardware version of the previous console that was inside the console. Like I've just said, with the PS3, it actually had the PS2 chips as part of the motherboard. So they didn't have to go, we need to go and speak to EA to make sure, we can have the license to let us use FIFA 2003 running on the PS3, because they weren't trying to emulate that one game. It was just, hey, we've put a PS2 inside our PS3. If a game was a PS2 game, it will just work, whatever it is. Whereas, like with Microsoft, they've got to literally create some software to run Red Dead Redemption. They can't. So that's a different proposition to just putting bits of a 360 inside an Xbox One or an Xbox Series. So I think that's where it's changed a little bit, and that's probably why we won't get a similar situation to a PS3 type console. I think it will just remain patchy going forward. Yeah,
Trev, I was going to sort of disagree with you there, and I actually think PlayStation or the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, they've both gone down sort of the very similar architecture from the last generation, but obviously sort of bumped up.
Yeah.
So if you buy an Xbox Series X, and on the same day you buy, what was it, Rise, Son of Rome, or whatever, which was a launch game from 2013 on the Xbox One, and you put that in, it will play natively, and you get the same experience, and the same with the PS5 playing, PS4 games. So, potentially you might have a situation where the next generation of computer games, of game consoles will, Xbox will hopefully say, well, Xbox One, Xbox Series X game, anything that's an Xbox game will work, and that's what I'd love to see that continuing.
Yeah, a lot of that comes down to the hardware architecture and how tied to that a lot of these games and the coding that they're doing is that. So, for example, when we switch from 32-bit processors and computers to 64-bit, a lot of old games made for 32-bit ones were just dead in the water and just not compatible. And and it all depends on just how tied to that architecture that is. And I think that even when you have companies like Sony who are doing this just to at least try and keep the closest generations backwards compatible, I think that if the gap gets too big, there's still quite a big sort of group of hobbyists and companies out there who are making handheld emulators that emulate a whole host of different stuff. They use RetroArch on there. So, potential legalities aside of how they go about it, there's still going to be devices and ways of still accessing some of those things, even if it's not on the key hardware by all the industry leaders.
Yeah. It's a really good point, actually, as well. Just talking about the architecture and how they're now quite similar. When we jump to the just sort of more powerful versions of the same sort of hardware architecture. Like you were saying, Stu, you're probably right in that sense. The next generation of consoles might be able to go like whatever the next Xbox or PS6 is. They could probably jump all the way back to PS4 with full compatibility. Because there'll probably still be, x86 or x64 based systems. I don't know if that means you would get perfect like emulation, or if there'll be a lot of it's not really emulation. They're still running. The code was designed to run on an Xbox One, which is an x86, x64 processor, and that'll be the same with the Xbox Series X. So it's not a new chip that that you have to adapt the game to run on. It should just be able to run natively. Maybe the graphics might have some glitches because the graphics drivers and the graphics card has obviously changed over a couple of generations. But maybe it'll mean things could be easier going forward.
Trev, what you'll need to do is put a turbo button on your console, and you press that, and it just lowers the power a little bit.
A big round button.
With round like button LCD. That says turbo. Well, on my PC, I always press the turbo button.
That was the most misleading thing as a kid growing up. I pressed it because I thought this will make it faster. I had no idea.
I'll be golden if I press that button. Everything will run perfectly.
A million megahertz or something if I hit that button.
Exactly. It just made everything slower.
I mean that stemmed from like the original sort of first sort of 2 or 3 years of the PC. It was like 4 megahertz and 8 megahertz chips, wasn't it? And the games were designed to run at that exact CPU frequency, and if it was anything faster, they would just run too quick. So you'd have your turbo buttons to reduce the speed of your CPU, so it'll run those old games.
Stupid branding. It should have been called something else.
Like slow.
Here's the slow button. Yeah,
it's not hard, so I mean, last sort of bit to talk about is really like getting your games graded and slabbed and things like that. I mean, Stu, would you consider doing that with one of your games, or did you think the whole thing's a big scam? What do you think?
I mean, but buying a sealed game, okay. First off, if I want to play a game, okay, I'll make sure the cover looks nice and it's got the instructions, and I'll buy that, okay. And let's say that's £30, and then potentially there might be a sealed version. So, but then I want to play the game, so I'll just unwrap it anyway. So then I'll be paying, let's say, £60 for a sealed version. So then it just comes down to making things look nice on your shelf. Oh, I've got the sealed version, and I'm in. I think you are as well, Trev. There's a Wii U collectors group, and someone was on there the other day, and I just sort of sighed a little bit. He said, "Oh yeah, I've got a sealed complete collection of Wii U games." And I was like, "You can't play any of them," and I didn't write that. I was all, good for you, mate.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh wow, oh great, all these games sealed, and then people take it to the next level. Is they'll send their sealed game off to some company. I don't know how much it costs. I'm gonna say 50 quid, 30 quid.
Yeah.
I don't know, 100 quid, however much it costs. I don't know. And they'll look at it and they'll analyze the how it's been sealed. Are there any scratches on? Are there any little tears? Is it dusty? Is it this? Is it that? And then they'll give it a rating out of 100. And then they'll put it into this plastic box with a sort of a barcode at the top and a bit of a hologram. And they'll say, "Oh, this is a 95 or a 98. Well done. It's an A++ game." And then you get this game back and you feel great. Because I've got this game that I can't play, and it's you put it on your shelf and you show it off on Facebook, and I don't get it. I want to play the game, and you not buy one version to have it analyzed, and another one to actually open up and play. It's I haven't got time for that.
Yeah, I think the grading system as well is purely just for people wanting to sell their games as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Rather than I want to know what it's rated at, because you've already got the value you've placed on it if you are collecting it for yourself. If you're looking at just selling it, I mean, this all kind of sort of happened in the 80s with when it came to coins. And you ended up with a lot of bodies that would come in to do all these grading things so that you could buy coins without having had seen them first. So the idea is that when you're buying online, even though you physically can't see it, you've got some idea as to the kind of quality that you're getting there. So that should be fine. But the way that they are graded, I'm not too keen on. Especially when you have companies like Water and Heritage Auction House, and the way that they have manipulated a lot of the pricing and driven those up is what kind of makes those not really a good scale. And it's also one of those things where they're not perfect. There's not an exact science. You have people who will get their game back. It's not graded at the rating that they wanted. So they'll just unbox it, send it back again, and then just hope that at some point somebody will go, "Oh, actually, this is a like a 9.8 instead of a 9.4 or something like that." And so you'll always kind of get that coming. But yeah, I'm certainly on the fence of it. It helps in some regards, but I think on the whole, it's mostly a scam with how it's run.
Yeah, I think with the actual grading you're talking about there, Al, I think there's been examples where people have literally sent a game off to get graded with one of these companies. They got back their grade and they were like, okay, this let me test something. And they sent it off to the same, they opened it up from the box, sent it back to the grading company, and they sent it back with a different grade. I mean, so
it's subjective, isn't it? It's how it looks to somebody. And one person will grade it one way compared to another. There isn't a science to it.
I think as well, when it gets compared to comics and baseball cards and things like that, those authorities that grade those are actually sort of a conglomerate of, like, for comics, it's like a team of experts from Marvel and a team of experts from DC Comics actually coming together and saying, well, this is what it looks like after we manufacture a comic. So that is literally a 10. This is what it looks like. So we can use that as our. So it's literally Marvel and DC are involved in the process of what the grades are. Whereas these video game companies are just like some random dudes who just set up a grading company who just arbitrarily came up with some they didn't work at the factory that was there producing the games and literally being able to hold what a brand new game looks like, to know where to start with a 10. They're just, people said, well, if it's got hasn't got any creases down the spine, I guess that's a 9.8. So they're just kind of just pulling out their asses a little bit. So yeah,
and they also have this whole thing where there's a massive conflict of interest where they're setting the prices as well. If you have somebody grading, what they should do is say, this is the quality of the product. I'm just saying what the quality is. Let the market decide what it's worth. But they themselves, WATA is one of the big ones, because there's WATA, there's the Video Games Authority, but WATA are the ones that are under a lot of scrutiny. There's a potential, like that. There's no lawsuit against them at the moment, but there's a potential lawsuit, a class action lawsuit being brought against them for various mispractices and things.
Yes,
but when they are the ones setting those prices to favor themselves, and then they've got other people buying stuff and not even acknowledging that they actually work for the company as well, is very problematic. But it's unregulated, and so there's not really much that can be done in that regard.
I watched a very good video. I think I can tell you also watched it, Al, from Carl Jobst.
Yeah. I've seen that one.
It's got, it's a 1.5 million, and it was absolutely brilliant. All the research he did, and the other day it was quite funny. I was walking in central London, and I actually walked past. There was, I think, in Mayfair somewhere, and there's Heritage Auctions have a little sort of shop there, and I sighed when I saw Heritage Auctions, and they had some, I don't know, sort of memorabilia type things, and they're all with the authority on selling these, and it does seem to be a real scam there, buying things off each other to raise the price and to a copy of Mario Brothers or Zelda in a plastic box that someone's written 9.8 on does not cost $1 million. It doesn't. It's you can go to any video game shop and buy that game for £15, and
a box of Mario 3, they went for £1 million. It's like there's millions of them out there. There's going to be sealed copies.
Exactly. It's all a big fraud. But then I'm not ever going to get involved in it. But it's how games are about being played, and we all. I'll admit I want something in good condition, and if there's 2 copies of a game in front of me, I'll buy the one in better condition. But that look better on my shelf, and that's what I want. But I'll get it, I'll open it up, and I'll play it. And I don't think I've ever bought a sealed game in my life, except for a game that's brand new on day one. That's obviously sealed, and you just open it. You don't think, I'll keep this sealed, and in 10 years' time, my $49.99 will be worth £110. Brilliant.
I've been looking into getting Game Boy games. I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but one of the things that I've started looking at, because obviously you can get them, loose, you can get them boxed, with the manual, and I've started to find that I'm liking getting them with the manual. I don't care so much about the box, but because the manual, especially when you've got games from that era where there's not really much backstory in the game itself, they actually give you a lot of the backstory and context of the game in the manual. And so that's kind of where I'm kind of getting it. And So having a game with a manual that's in good condition is something that appeals to me more. Is it required?
Yeah.
No. But if it's there, that's more what I'm aiming for. And whilst I absolutely love box art, there's some really good books out there, coffee table books that have pretty much the artwork for the majority of, if not all of the games released. And I'd much rather invest in something like that and admire the artwork that way, as a personal preference. And especially as it's a more cost-effective way of doing it is the other thing.
Yeah.
And I think that these books, at least for when it comes to the artwork, that's also another really good way of preserving that artwork and showcasing everything in one place.
Yeah, and it obviously the quality, you could argue, might be even better than the original box.
Yeah, printed on better stock, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question is: has anyone in this? Has anyone got a slabbed copy of a game? I'm looking at you, Trev.
Nope. I've got sealed games, but weirdly, most of my sealed games.
Trev, you're terrible. You must open them and play them. What's wrong with you?
They're not. They're not
games are there to be played.
I must say, having a look at those slab boxes, especially the ones that are graded, I think they look terrible. It's not only is it just this big, transparent box, but the fact it's got this ugly tab sticking out the top with this number, and stuff. It's like it's not something I would want to display at all.
Yeah.
I think if I was to display something like that, if I wanted to have something that was boxed, I wouldn't care that it was sealed, but what I'd probably do is frame it. And I think framing it would be a much nicer presentation than when these things are slab, which again it's more useful for if you're planning on selling it. And if I was getting something for myself, if I was selling it, it would be for other reasons, whereas I'd be really collecting it to keep for myself for as long as I want to keep it for. I don't know how you do feel. Is that kind of similar for yourselves, or?
What we're talking about framing things is at Christmas. I don't know if you saw them going around Instagram, but they have you can buy like a frame that's like the size of an LP album record, and it's basically got a Game Boy in there. And I'm just looking up at it now. And they take them all apart and they're basically glued on there, and they sort of show which parts which, and it's all taken apart, and I think they look really, really good. But then I'm almost arguing with myself because I'm saying, oh, it's ridiculous, or you're getting a game, you're not even playing it. Well, I've bought a Game Boy that's been taken to pieces and then put into a frame, and I've put it on the wall, and there's
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say there's no. I can't play that, but then I get a lot of enjoyment out of sitting here and looking at it. And I'm looking at it now, and I think it looks absolutely smashing. And just seeing all the chips and the button, they're all separated. I think it looks really good.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about the way that they do those is that in a lot of cases, those are parts from a Game Boy that does not work, and the shells are often aftermarket replicas. So not all the time, but sometimes.
Well,
and so
hope this one isn't the batteries.
Like I said, yeah,
it's a bit rusty.
Depending on the condition of the original case, it might be an aftermarket one. But the key thing is, it's not one that was in working order that was then taken apart. It's one that did not work and then was taken apart, which means that you're not losing something functional. It's repurposing something that was not functional to have something that gives you the kind of joy that you get when you look at it. And I think that is a great way of doing it. So you're not taking away something from the pool of working devices, especially when those are limited.
Yeah. It's just a bit a weird situation, isn't it? I mean, perhaps if there was a way that the actual manufacturers of these things could come together and set up an authority that's a bit more legit, perhaps there wouldn't be as many issues. But maybe it's something that will never. I don't think I can ever see that happening in reality. But they'll never agree on anything like that. So we just have to deal with these weird companies that have just been set up in someone's spare time to put a box around your boxes. And tell you,
I mean, even if Nintendo or everyone came together, I wouldn't be interested in having anything graded, or I just think it's a little bit of a sort of a waste of time, and
You get no argument from me.
Yeah, plus you have to spend quite a lot of money. I think there's some of them it's like $100 just to get this rating, which is again only useful if you're planning on selling it. Even then, that's questionable.
It's just buy a plastic box.
Just buy a plastic box, buy a bit of Tupperware.
Yeah.
Stick your game in there, write 100 on the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care what they say is would be the grade for my copy of Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, but to me, that's one of the best bits of my collection, really, just because of the personal value and history that has to me.
Well, you can grade it whatever you want, and you're just as valid as these Water guys. So
it's 1.9. There you go.
Exactly.
9.9, right there.
Out of a scale of 1,000.
9.9.
On a scale of 1,000.
Yeah, okay. That's probably more accurate.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that was a very interesting discussion, so hopefully it's provoked some thoughts in our listeners. But Al, where can people find you on the interwebs these days?
Well, everything I'm up to is listed over at alistairmcfly.com, which is also includes the Star Trek podcast that we spoke about earlier in the show. Which is at longrangesensors.com. Yes, we recently released a new episode about the Star Trek Enterprise episode Shuttle Pod 1. So if you're into Star Trek and like retrospectives, give us a check out.
Yeah, we try to keep it quiet. We don't like mentioning it too much on the show, but anybody that doesn't know, please check out mine and Al's other podcast if you're a Star Trek fan. Stu, where can you find Console Shock on the interwebs?
If you just search Console Shock, but consoleshock.net. You'll find us on Facebook under Console Shock. You'll find us on YouTube, Console Shock again, and any podcast. I've heard them podcast catchers clients.
That's
podcast
good.
clients.
Good phrase.
Yeah. So we're on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes podcasts, Google Podcasts. So I think we've been picked up by pretty much sort of all of the big ones now. So wherever you get your podcasts from, you'll find us.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for checking out this episode of Console Shock. Take care, and we will see you in the next one.
Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.